Thank you, Mr. Bavli. It is now my great honor to welcome a man who needs no introduction. He's a writer, diplomat, soldier, and educator. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome Israel's ambassador to the United States, Dr. MichaelOren.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Ofer. Thank you, Michael Adler, Norman Brahman, Jacob Solomon. It was a great article yesterday. It was indeed. Thank you, my wife, Sally, for joining me today. Just before I begin, I got to say something. I've been on long before I got into this job, I was on the Jewish speaking circuit for about 30 years. And you could be pretty sure if you were going to any Jewish community in North America, if they told you that 300 people would be there, that would be the first sign that 150 people would be there. Only in Miami would they tell you that 800 people are going to be there and 1,250 show up. Amazing. Federation, just a terrific job, and this community is extraordinary. About a year ago, many of you may remember, I walked onto an auditorium at a prominent West Coast university, name will go unmentioned, intending to give a personal and historical perspective on the U.S.-Israel relationship. And I'd scarcely begun my remarks when a student stood up and started screaming that Israel had massacred Palestinian babies and that I, as Israel's ambassador, was a war criminal. I was forced to stop and wait while the student was subdued. But then no sooner had I resumed my speech than another student sprung up and started hollering similar charges at me. And so it went on. Students strategically placed in center rows and in center seats from which they could not be easily evicted, jumping up and heckling at intervals designed to prevent me from ever completing the first 5 minutes, much less the full duration of my speech. I faced a serious dilemma right then. Should I leave the stage and not allow the state of Israel to be used as a punching bag, or should I rather stay and keep restarting a speech that could not be honorably or even audibly completed? At this point, I became aware keenly that at stake was not just my pride or even my speech, but the right of the state of Israel to be heard in America and in an institution devoted to free and open discourse. At stake was Israel's very legitimacy. Now, my experience on that campus was only a small example of the global campaign to deny Israel the right to defend itself, or yes, the right to exist as a sovereign Jewish state in our ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. Elsewhere, in the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, where Israel was accused of mounting a pre-planned genocidal war against the people of Gaza, in British universities and labor unions that call for boycotting Israeli scholars and Israeli goods, in certain Scandinavian grocery stores that banned Israeli products from their shelves, in European capitals where warrants were issued for Israeli military and civilian leaders as war criminals, to mainline churches that condemned Israeli military responses without mentioning once the terror that necessitated them. And on the front page of a prestigious national magazine in this country that insinuated that Israelis preferred money to peace, in all of those areas, Israel was under assault. Now, faced with this onslaught, the Jewish world began to reel in crisis. How could we understand this sophisticated, multi-pronged threat? How could we begin to summon the resources, moral, physical, to meet this threat? And most dauntingly, how could we even define it? A year ago, I have to say, I had not heard of those initials, BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction. BDS does describe the range of threats we face, at least in this country. There have been attempts in senates and in town councils in this country to boycott and divest, student senates and town councils to boycott and divest from Israel, and demands to cut off vital U.S. aid for Israel's defense. Elsewhere, though, and particularly in areas of Western Europe and throughout the Muslim world, BDS represents something vastly more sinister. Technically, tactically, BDS represents the latest effort to destroy the Jewish state. Now, the first stage, you may recall, began back in 1948, and that was the effort to defeat Israel militarily by conventional means. And that stage ended in 1973 with the failed surprise attacks of the Egyptian and Syrian armies during the Yom Kippur War. The second stage began almost at the same time with the massacres of the early 1970s, and that was the terror stage. And that was a stage that ended only a few years ago with the end of the abortive so-called Second Intifada. Now comes the third and most fateful stage. The attempt to succeed where armies and terrorists fail, to eliminate not the Israeli army or to kill Israeli civilians, but to obliterate the very idea of a Jewish state. This is a new type of warfare, one that is being waged in the media, in our households, in our supermarkets, in our communities, and in our schools. And the power of this war may exceed that of any previous offensive, because it can be cloaked in political correctness and in the prevailing anti-war mood. Behind that veneer, though, BDS looks and hooks into the oldest hatred, one that has caused incalculable Jewish suffering. Indeed, in another place, in another generation, BDS might have stood for banish, desecrate, and sequester. Or in another generation, burn, destroy, and slaughter. The acronym BDS is nothing less than a synonym for anti-Semitism. Now, some of you may be asking yourself, hasn't he gone a little bit too far? No doubt, there are certainly some well-meaning people who support boycotts and sanctions because they think they're promoting the idea of a peace process. But no, unfortunately, I haven't gone too far. And here's why. All peoples of the world, all peoples, are their stories. And there is no story as astonishing and as epic as our story, the story of the Jewish people. It's a story of a small and anomalous band of nomads bonded together by revolutionary notions of universal morality and a single God. And that people survived 400 years of slavery, 40 years of wandering in the desert to establish an independent state in the land of their forefathers. That people was exiled and repatriated and exiled again. In this process, we inspired two faiths whose adherents today number more than half of humanity. That is a people that has survived countless expulsions, depredations, massacres, and finally the largest mass murder in human history. And that people did not merely survive. That people once again returned to its homeland. We revived our ancient language. We created a thriving democracy, a flourishing economy, and we absorbed millions of our fellow Jews from around the world, all the while fighting vastly superior forces determined to destroy us. Now, there is no story in human history remotely like this story. And yet it is precisely that story that anti-Semitism seeks to pervert. Anti-Semitism scours the Bible for stories of cruelty, licentiousness, and greed, and rather than depict them as the shortcomings of human beings, anti-Semitism upholds those shortcomings as uniquely defining Jewish defects. Further, anti-Semitism focuses obsessively on these alleged shortcomings, ignoring those of other people, and blames those shortcomings for the world's problems. BDS similarly culls aspects of Israeli policy and society. It deprives those aspects of context and uses them to define Israel as a whole. BDS does this, moreover, while ignoring the egregious human rights abuses of Israel's neighbors. All of the Middle East problems are Israel's fault, say the champions of BDS. For them, Zionism is not liberation, it is colonialism. Israel is not redemption, it is oppression. Now, anti-Semitism, we know, assigns to the Jews those qualities most hated by any given society at any particular time. If the society is a communist society, Jews are capitalists. And if the society is capitalist, then Jews are socialists. If the state is nationalist, Jews are cosmopolitans. If the state is a militarist state, Jews are pacifists. Or conversely, in a post-nationalist, post-militarist state, Jews are chauvinist warmongers. Now, today's world has emerged largely victorious from the civil rights struggles, the battle against white supremacist rule in South Africa, against the genocides of Rwanda and Darfur and the Balkans. In that world, our world, there are labels every bit as hateful as those formerly applied to Jews. In our world, the worst word you can attach to any people or to any individual is racist. The worst word is apartheid. The very worst words are ethnic cleansing. Racist, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, these are precisely the words that the promoters of BDS associate with the State of Israel. But BDS is not just an Israeli problem. It is a Jewish problem, employing the tools that have been used to distort and demonize our story for thousands of years. Historically, every attempt to destroy us as a people began with a campaign to dehumanize us as a people. That was the case before the Inquisition. It was the case before the Holocaust. BDS is not just a Jewish problem. BDS, beyond that, is an American problem. Like anti-Semitism, BDS is an attack on democracy. BDS promoters today tell Americans what they can and cannot say on their campuses, what products they can and cannot buy in their stores, and what authors they can and cannot read. Imagine what they will do tomorrow. What then is our answer? Well, the first response is to understand the true nature of BDS and the danger it poses. We must educate our communities, and especially our young people, that BDS, far from being a non-violent means of opposing this or that Israeli policy, is nothing less than the delegitimization of the State of Israel, stripping it of the means to defend itself, or even the means to define itself. BDS employs classic anti-Semitic tools in ways that threaten not only Israel, but also American Jews and American values. And BDS is anti-peace. It would prevent Israel, an Israel startup, from exporting alternative energy technology to developing countries. BDS would prevent an Israeli Arab doctor from attending a crucial medical conference in London. BDS is anti-peace. But recognizing BDS is not enough. We have to unite actively to combat it. We have to educate not only our own community, but other communities, other religious communities, other ethnic communities, about the dangers that BDS poses to them and to their freedom. If there are calls to boycott Israeli products, buy those products. If someone is calling for divestment from Israeli companies, invest in those companies. And if an Israeli or a pro-Israeli speaker is coming to a community center or a campus near you, attend and make sure that speaker can be heard. I remember being on that campus about a year ago and having to make that decision, whether to remain on the rostrum and so deprive the listeners in my audience of my message, or to leave and deprive those hecklers of a target that they could use as that punching bag. And I remember at that moment looking out into the audience, and there were members of the community. There were students, there were professionals, retirees, Jews, and non-Jews, who were sitting there and encouraging me and telling me to stay no matter what. I'll never forget it. They're all going, stay, stay. And I looked at them, and I remembered our Jewish story, and I stayed. Thank you.